The stench hit Lena Bishop the moment her boot sank into the sucking black mud beside the dock. It wasn't just decay. It was the cloying sweetness of drowned lilies layered over the metallic tang of old blood and the eye-watering reek of something profoundly wrong festering deep within the earth. It coiled into her nostrils, thick and greasy, making her gag. "Mark! Leo! Stay on the boards!" Her voice, sharp with sudden panic, cut through the oppressive silence of the marsh. Her husband, Mark, struggling with their single battered suitcase, froze on the rickety dock. 4-year-old Leo whimpered, burying his face deeper into Mark's neck, a small wet cough rattling his tiny chest. The damp air hung like a sodden blanket, heavy enough to choke on. The house watched them. That was the only word for it. Not welcoming, but observing with the cold, patient stillness of something ancient and utterly alien. The quiet house on the marsh, the impossibly cheap online listing had called it, a fixer-upper with character, steeped in local history. Now, standing on the splintered planks slick with viscous moisture, the Bishops understood the price of desperation. Mark's redundancy payout hadn't stretched far in the city. This forgotten place on the edge of the Blackroot Fen was all they could afford. Its timbers, once perhaps a deep forest green, were now slicked black with perpetual damp, peeling like leprous skin. Small, high windows reflected only the bruised purple of the gathering twilight sky, revealing nothing of the interior. It didn't sit on the marsh. It seemed to grow from it, rooted in the primordial ooze, its sagging foundations hidden by a ground-hugging mist that writhed like restless phantoms. Tendrils of gray-green moss hung like rotten lace, dripping with condensation. The silence was absolute. No insects buzzed, no frogs croaked, no wind sighed through the skeletal reeds that choked the water's edge. It was the silence of a tomb, a vacuum that pressed in on Lena's eardrums, amplifying the frantic thud of her own heart and Leo's shallow, congested breaths. "See? Atmospheric," Mark said, forcing a cheerfulness that rang hollow against the marsh's quiet. His smile was tight, unconvincing. He shifted Leo's weight. "Needs work, sure, but space? Privacy? Leo can breathe cleaner air out here." He gestured vaguely towards the house, avoiding looking directly at its darkened maw where a warped, heavy door hung slightly ajar. "Cleaner air?" Lena wanted to scream. The air tasted like spoilage. It clung to her tongue, coated her throat. She looked down at her boot, still half submerged in the glistening black muck beside the dock. It wasn't just mud. It was thick, clotting, like congealed oil mixed with other things. She wrenched her foot free with a sickening slurp. The mud clung with unnatural tenacity, leaving strands of foul, tar-like residue stretching between boot and earth before snapping back. A single pale bubble rose from the hole her boot had made, popped silently, and released a fresh wave of that metallic sweet stench. "Come on," Mark urged, stepping cautiously onto the narrow path of weed-choked flagstones leading towards the porch. "Let's get inside before it gets dark." He sounded less sure now. The twilight deepened, painting the marsh in shades of bruise and bile. Leo lifted his head, his eyes wide and glassy with fever. "Scary," he whispered, pointing a trembling finger not at the house, but at the marsh itself. "Whispers." Lena froze. "What whispers, sweetheart?" Leo just buried his face again, trembling violently. Lena's blood ran cold. Children sensed things adults rationalized away. The porch groaned ominously under their combined weight. The wood felt spongy, yielding slightly like rotten fruit. The front door, heavy oak banded with rusted iron, stood slightly ajar. Mark pushed it open with his shoulder. It moved with a low, tortured groan, like the sigh of something immense awakening. Darkness swallowed them. The smell inside was worse. It was the marsh stench amplified, concentrated, decay, damp, and something else. A dry, papery scent like ancient dust, but laced with a faint, unsettling sweetness. Lena fumbled for her phone, switching on the flashlight. The beam cut a feeble swath through the gloom, illuminating swirling dust motes dancing in the oppressive air. They stood in a large, low-ceilinged entry hall. The walls weren't just damp, they glistened. A slick, dark moisture seeped from the wood paneling, beading and running in slow viscous rivulets down to the uneven flagstone floor. The air felt thick, wet, and unnaturally cold, seeping through Lena's clothes to the bone. It wasn't the chill of neglect, it was the cold of deep earth, of graves. "Hello?" Mark called out, his voice swallowed by the heavy stillness. Only silence answered, a silence that felt watchful. Leo whimpered again, a high-pitched sound of pure fear. "Downstairs," he mumbled into Mark's neck. "Bad man downstairs." "There's no one here, buddy," Mark soothed, but his eyes darted nervously around the shadowed corners revealed by Lena's trembling light beam. The beam caught something on the far wall, dark, irregular stains spreading upwards from the skirting board like creeping mold, but thicker, almost organic. A sound, faint, distant. They all heard it this time. Lena's breath hitched. Tap, tap, tap. It came from somewhere deep within the house, down below. Steady, rhythmic, insistent, like a fingernail or something harder, tapping patiently against wood or stone. "Probably just a loose shutter," Mark whispered, but his face was pale in the phone light. "Or pipes?" Tap, tap, tap. It paused, then started again. Closer? Or was the oppressive silence playing tricks? Another sound joined it, a soft, wet, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled slowly through thick mud. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, or perhaps from beneath the floor. Leo began to cry in earnest, thin, terrified wails that echoed slightly in the dead air. "Wanna go now?" Lena's flashlight beam jerked towards a doorway leading deeper into the house. The darkness beyond seemed absolute, a solid wall of black. For a fraction of a second, she thought she saw movement. A deeper shadow shifting within the shadows near the floor. Something low, something that crawled. Tap, tap, tap. The dragging sound grew louder, wetter. It seemed to be moving along the wall just behind them. Lena spun, the light beam sweeping erratically. The slick, weeping wall stared back, empty. But the wet patches, did they pulse slightly, like something breathing beneath the surface? Then, cutting through the other sounds, unmistakable and chillingly close, a soft, wet, bubbling sigh. It came from the direction of the stairs leading down into impenetrable blackness. The stairs, Leo said, led to the bad man. Lena's grip tightened on her phone, the plastic casing slick with cold sweat. Mark stood frozen, Leo clinging to him like a limpet, both radiating terror. The Marsh's silence was gone, replaced by the house's quiet symphony of dread. The tapping, the dragging, the sighing wet bubble, and beneath it all, the low, almost subsonic hum of the marsh itself, pressing in, seeping through the walls. The quiet house was awake, and it was hungry. The first night was an exercise in shared terror. They huddled in the least damp room they could find, a small parlor with a crumbling fireplace choked with decades of cold ash. Mark had managed to light a single kerosene lamp they'd found, its flickering light casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. The sounds didn't stop. The tapping became a constant, maddening counterpoint to the wet dragging and the occasional sickening bubble or sigh. Sometimes, faintly, a thin, high-pitched sound like a child's whimper would thread through the darkness, seeming to come from different directions. Leo, dosed with fever medicine, slept fitfully, whimpering in his sleep, his skin clammy. Mark insisted it was the house unsettling. Old timber, he said, his voice strained, saturated ground, makes noises. But his eyes betrayed him, constantly scanning the weeping walls, the dark corners. Lena didn't argue. Arguing felt dangerous, like acknowledging the fear might invite it closer. The moving van arrived the next day. Two burly men, faces grim beneath their caps, unloaded their meager furniture with unnerving speed. They refused coffee, refused to step beyond the porch, their eyes avoiding the black water and the oppressive silence. "Place gives me the creeps," one muttered to the other, loud enough for Lena to hear. "Like it's watching." They drove off, tires spinning mud, leaving the Bishops truly alone. Days bled into a week, each one eroding their sanity grain by grain. The damp was pervasive. Nothing stayed dry. Clothes mildewed overnight. Bread turned green in hours. A pervasive, cold sweat coated everything, including their skin. Leo's cough worsened, becoming a deep, wet rattle that echoed horribly in the silent rooms. He grew listless, his eyes losing focus, drawn instead to the walls, to the floor, listening to sounds Lena couldn't hear. "The bad man is singing," he whispered once, his voice thin and distant. "It's a sleepy song." Mark threw himself into futile repairs. He tried to patch leaks, only to find the source wasn't rain, but the weeping walls themselves. He nailed down a loose floorboard in the hall, revealing not joists, but a packed, dark mass beneath, fibrous, glistening black, smelling powerfully of the marsh. He quickly hammered the board back down, his face ashen. He stopped talking about fixing the place. The sounds intensified. The tapping wasn't just below anymore, it was inside the walls. The dragging became a constant, wet slithering, sometimes seeming inches away on the other side of the plaster. Lena began finding things, small white fragments near the cellar door. At first, she thought they were bits of plaster or shell. Then she picked one up. It was smooth, curved, a tiny piece of bone. Human? Animal? She couldn't tell. She dropped it, shuddering. One afternoon, searching for dry firewood in a dank storeroom off the kitchen, Lena's flashlight beam fell upon a section of wall where the plaster had crumbled away entirely. Beneath it wasn't lath, but a densely packed mass of dark, fibrous material shot through with countless small, white objects. Bones, finger bones, toe bones, fragments of skull, vertebrae like tiny beads, packed together with a thick, black, tarry substance that glistened wetly. The foundation. The house wasn't built on the marsh, it was built of it, built of mud and death. She backed out, retching, the image seared into her brain. That night, Mark finally broke. The tapping had become a frenzied drumming inside the wall of their makeshift bedroom. Leo was delirious, murmuring about the roots and the deep one. Mark grabbed a fire poker and slammed it into the weeping wall. "Shut up," he roared. Plaster exploded. Dark, viscous fluid, thick as oil, sprayed out, and something else writhed within the hole, a thick black tendril, slick and glistening, covered in tiny, root-like filaments. It recoiled from the light, withdrawn into the darkness with a wet, sucking sound. Mark stumbled back, poker clattering to the floor, staring at the oozing hole in horror. Not timber, not pipes. Something alive, living in the walls, living in the foundation of bones. "Lena," he whispered, his voice raw with terror, "what is this place?" The descent began. Mark changed. He stopped fighting the damp, stopped trying to rationalize. He spent hours staring at the marsh through the grimy windows, his eyes distant. He complained of the cold, an internal cold no fire could touch. He started scratching, unconsciously at first, then obsessively, at his arms, his neck. Red, weeping sores appeared. Lena tried to treat them, but the ointment seemed to make them worse, melting into the lesions with a faint hiss. His skin took on a grayish pallor, feeling unnaturally clammy and yielding, like wet leather. Leo stopped coughing, but his silence was worse. He moved silently through the house, barefoot on the cold stones, drawn to the cellar door. He'd press his ear against it, sometimes for hours, a faint, unsettling smile playing on his lips. "He likes my songs," he'd say. "The deep one likes me." When Lena tried to pull him away, his skin was icy cold, and his eyes, when they met hers, held a depth and ancientness that froze her blood. Moss began to grow in patches on his pajamas, tiny green filaments that seemed rooted in the fabric, or perhaps his skin. Lena fought. She tried packing their bags. The suitcase zipper jammed, fused shut with a sudden bloom of black mold. She tried the phone. The landline emitted only a wet, gurgling static. Her cell phone, fully charged, showed no signal. Then the screen flickered and died, oozing a dark, viscous liquid from its seams. She ran for the door. The heavy oak wouldn't budge. It wasn't locked. It was sealed. Thick, black tendrils, like the one Mark had exposed, had grown from the frame and the floor, binding the door shut, pulsing faintly. She beat on it until her fists bled, screaming into the silent marsh. No one heard. No one came. The house was digesting them. Mark's deterioration accelerated. He moved stiffly, joints cracking wetly. The sores spread, merging into large patches of weeping, black-veined flesh. His fingers began to swell at the tips, becoming bulbous and dark. He stopped eating the meager supplies they had left, drawn instead to the cellar door. He'd stand before it, breathing heavily, a low, wet gurgle in his chest. One morning, Lena found him trying to pry the heavy padlock off the cellar door with his bare hands, his swollen fingers bleeding dark fluid onto the stones. "He calls," Mark rasped, his voice thick, slurred. "Downstairs. Warm, wet, good." His eyes were filmed over, milky. Lena knew she had to get Leo out. Mark was lost. She found a rusted hatchet in the storeroom. It took hours of frantic, terrified chopping, the black tendrils resisting like tough rubber, spraying foul-smelling ichor. Finally, with a tearing sound, the last thick root snapped. She wrenched the heavy door open. Cool, damp air rushed out, carrying the overwhelming stench of the marsh at its most potent decay, stagnant water, and that underlying metallic sweetness now overpowering. Leo stood behind her, watching silently. "Leo, come on!" Lena screamed, grabbing his icy hand. "We're leaving, now!" She dragged him onto the porch towards the treacherous path through the mist. The marsh seemed darker, the mist thicker, clinging to their legs like cold, wet hands. The silence was absolute, waiting. They stumbled down the porch steps. Leo planted his feet. "No," he said, his voice small but firm. He pulled his hand from Lena's. His eyes were fixed on the house, not the escape route. Home. Leo, no! Lena lunged for him. Her foot hit the slick flagstone path. It wasn't stone anymore. It was soft, yielding. Her boot sank instantly, past the ankle, into the thick, hungry black mud that had somehow crept onto the path. She screamed, trying to pull free. The mud sucked, held with terrifying strength. It felt alive, pulling her down. Tendrils of black ooze slithered up her calf. She looked back at Leo. He hadn't moved. He stood on the porch, watching her with those ancient, calm eyes. Behind him in the doorway stood a figure. It was Mark, but not Mark. His skin was gray and glistening, stretched tight over swelling limbs. Black veins pulsed beneath the surface. His eyes were completely milk white. His mouth hung slightly open, a slow trickle of dark sludge dripping onto his chest. One hand, swollen and webbed between the fingers, reached out towards Leo, not threateningly, but possessively. Leo took it. "Leo?" Lena shrieked, the mud now at her knees, cold seeping through her clothes, paralyzing. "Sweetheart, please, run." Leo looked at her, a flicker of something, sorrow, recognition, crossing his face before it settled into placid acceptance. "It's okay, Mommy," he whispered, his voice carrying strangely clear in the silence. "The quiet house loves us. It's warm inside. The deep one sings us to sleep." He turned and walked back into the dark doorway with the thing that had been Mark. The heavy oak door swung shut behind them with a final, echoing thud. The sucking mud reached Lena's waist. The cold was bone deep, sapping her strength. Her struggles grew weaker. She looked down at the mud engulfing her. Pale shapes, half buried, glinted beneath the black surface. Bones. Countless bones, packed together like the foundation of the house. The mud wasn't just mud. It was the house's body, its digestive tract. It pulled her deeper. The stench filled her lungs. She heard it then, not just around her, but inside her head, a low, wet, bubbling sigh of satisfaction. The tap, tap, tapping resumed, a slow, patient rhythm coming from beneath the mud, from beneath the bones. It sounded like knuckles on wood, like something vast and patient, waiting deep below, welcoming her home. The black ooze closed over Lena's head. A final stream of bubbles, thick and slow, broke the surface of the quiet marsh. Then, silence descended once more, broken only by the soft, wet sounds of the house settling. On the porch, a single, small, muddy footprint slowly dissolved in the perpetual mist, vanishing as if it had never been. The quiet house stood sentinel, windows reflecting the empty sky, rooted deep in the dark water and the bones, waiting for the next desperate soul. The deep one slept, content, its new family safe within its walls.